and get started. We're a minute after. Welcome. It's good to see all you guys. Start of the new year. This is exciting one to have Jamil on, but also just to see all your faces. I know that we've all been cooped up either by snow or by COVID or everything else. So it's good to see everybody. With that, I want to say welcome, Jamil. We're excited to have you. One of the first books that we got from a professional brewer was your book. When we asked, how do we find a good source of being able to learn how to brew, good base recipes and good advice? And he said, let me give you this book. And so this is, you can see all the little tabs we have in it. This has been our Bible as we've continued to learn. So we appreciate you being here tonight.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I'm so sorry that the previous meeting that I was just sitting at home relaxing, and you know, I got no reminder on the calendar for some reason. I don't know why. I still don't know why.
It happens. Sometimes you get sucked into those Netflix shows.
Yeah. I was just sitting watching TV. I was just hanging out. Could have easily made the meeting.
Right on. So I know you've got Brewing Classic Styles. You've got Yeast, the Practical Guide to Beer Fermentation. You have a name that I'm going to try to not destroy, Jamil Zainasheff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you also have a couple of podcasts, right?
Yeah. Been doing podcasts on the Brewing Network for, pretty much since they started. I first did the Jamil show, which was classic styles, and then I did Can You Brew It, which was a cloning challenge show, which was really cool. Really enjoyed that, but it had a lot of moving parts, so it was a lot of work. And then also at the same time, Brew Strong. Been doing Brew Strong. We're coming up by, in theory, Saturday will be our 300th show of Brew Strong. And then we also did some other stuff in there. I don't know, other random stuff.
Right on. Very exciting. Now I'm sure I'm going to ask you questions that you've been asked a million times. So bear with me. But can you kind of talk us through when you first started brewing and how you caught the bug?
Yeah, my neighbor, Steve, neighbor at the time, he called out to me one day over the fence. He was like, Jamil, come taste this beer. And he brought me this beer, and I tasted it, and it was like the best beer I ever had. I'm like, wow, that's amazing, Steve. Where do I buy this? And he's like, well, you can't buy it. I made it myself. And I was blown away because I thought you needed, a big factory and German people to make beer. So I told my wife about it, and she got me a Mr. Beer kit for Christmas. And, the big plastic barrel with, the little can kits, and you add sugar and all that. So I made that, and it turned out horrible. And I was like, okay, wait, Steve made beer and it was really good, so I must be doing something wrong. And that got me going. So I bought books, and I studied, and I asked questions, and I just started brewing more and more. And, because I wanted to make a beer as good as what Steve gave me. And it didn't take too long. It's just been a passion ever since.
And after you got your first beer set up, and I'm sure you were talking about what the setup was. As you started to grow and advance, where did you find you got the most benefit in your equipment? Because I know when we started, it was buckets, and then we started talking to our friends and brewers, and like, oh, you really need to invest. We had some tell us you need to invest in your hot liquor tank, you need to invest in your kettle. Some of the best advice that we ever got was your mash tun. That's, if you're going to invest anything, go there for your next step. Where did you end up growing as you were home brewing?
Well, I went to, a larger pot. I went to, better chilling, things like that. But the one that really made the biggest difference in the quality of the beer was temperature controlled fermentation. That was huge. So everything else was an incremental improvement, or it made the brew day better. Either the process was quicker, like chilling, or it made a small incremental difference in the quality of the beer, like full wort boil, things like that. And then but temperature controlled fermentation was huge. That is just a dramatic difference. And then when I went to all grain, I was a customer of More Beer, or like the first time I went into More Beer, I started talking to them, and they asked me questions. And the reason I went into More Beer instead of ordering online was their online ordering was so bad that I told myself, like, it was just easier for me to drive here, the 1 hour drive, than it was to order online. And they were saying how difficult it was to get somebody to fix the thing. And I said, well, I'll do it for you. I said, it's not that big a deal. And so in the evenings on my laptop, I was having to be down in San Francisco anyways. I knocked out a website for them that they could order from. And in exchange, they gave me a 10-gallon tippy dump system, one of their first systems, the 1550. And so I went from, extract up to a nice system that had, all the bells and whistles. So it made a quick jump there.
Was there a certain point where you kind of had that light bulb go off, or that aha moment where you're like, oh, now I get it? Were you able to put together a consistent brew day of something that you brewed previously? Or, where you got to the point where you thought, you know what, I've been doing this wrong this whole time, and I've made this change, and now my beer is actually turning out really good? I know we've had that moment. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think
you can't tell us that your beer was awesome the entire time.
No. It turned out pretty good pretty early on. I think I wasn't too far in when I thought the beer was good. And I remember it was the chocolate hazelnut porter that I thought was good. So I took it to the local homebrew shop, get some opinions. And some of the people would be like, oh, that's great, that's fantastic. And other people would be like, oh, that sucks. And you couldn't tell if it was, and all your friends tell you, oh, it's great, best thing they've ever drank. And I'm like, well, that's why I sent it into competition. And I got like a third place in the Mayfair with it. And I'm like, great. So it was actually a good beer. And then, I kind of went from there. And I think it was like batch 8 or 13 or something, or I forget when it was.
And that's really becomes one of the hard things, is getting honest feedback.
Yeah.
We same way. Our neighbors love our beer.
Yeah.
It could taste horrible for all I know.
Right. Nobody's going to complain about free beer. Well, some people will, but not many. But today I taste beers from people that it's the first beer they ever brewed, and I've tasted fantastic beers. Somebody's brewing fantastic beer from beer one. It's shocking to me, and how much things have changed, because I'm sure some of you have probably been brewing longer than I have, but back in the late 90s, early 2000s, people would homebrew, and man, there was a lot of bad beer. And people have been brewing a decade or more, terrible beer. But now, like I said, there's people that first batch in, and man, that's really good. And and it's people who will say, oh yeah, I read a bunch of books. I listened to a bunch of podcasts. I mean, I remember one guy told me he had been studying brewing for 2 years before he brewed his first batch.
Wow.
I was like, oh my God. And I was just prepared for the beer to be absolutely horrible, because I was thinking, oh, this guy's maybe overthinking it, or I don't know what. And it was fantastic. It was one of those ones where I was just blown away about how good it was for his first beer, fresh beer. So
At what point did you take that next step and decide that you were going?
No, I didn't do that.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
At what point did you decide, this is going really good, I'm gonna try and go pro?
Oh, well, it always crosses your mind. Anybody who's brewed and had your neighbor tell you how you make the best beer in the world, you think, oh yeah, all right. So it crosses your mind, but my wife always said, no, you have a good job. You're not quitting your job and opening a brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was 2009. I convinced my wife that I needed to quit my job, and then I quit my job, and then I wrote the yeast book. And after that, I was, kind of relaxing. And she's like, okay, now what are you going to do for a job? I'm like, well, I could write more books. And she's like, no, you need like a regular job. I didn't want to go back to software. So I said, well, I could open a brewery. And then she said yes. I'm like, okay. So.
And what was the toughest transition from going from home brewing to pro?
It's all the business aspect of it. It's financial, it's employees, it's regulations, laws. As a home brewer, you really don't have to comply with hardly any regulations. Even the 200 gallons a year for a family, it's like, yeah, as long as you're not selling it or going nuts with it, they're going to leave you alone. So you don't really have to worry about any of that. You have to worry about the costs of other than what you can afford or what your spouse may let you spend. You're fine doing anything you want. Whereas commercially, you make something that's insanely expensive, and then you got to figure out how to sell it, or you're just doing it because you can afford to throw that money away, which is tough. A few years into when we first started, I really wanted to brew an ordinary bitter, commercially, and it would have been something I would have just brewed at home to enjoy, and wouldn't have thought anything about it, but just to have time to brew at home. And I was just like, we'll brew 30 barrels of ordinary bitter. And then everyone's like, well, we shouldn't, because nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's going to buy a 3.8% beer called ordinary bitter. I'm like, well, I don't care. Let's just do it. And it's not that expensive a beer to make, because it's mainly just malt. And so we brewed it, and sure enough, most people didn't enjoy it, but all the brewery staff just absolutely loves that beer. And there were some customers that did too. And so, we did stuff like that. Just recently, we made an ice bock. So you can't legally make an ice bock as a brewery. I was able to get it approved, a formula approved for it as because we also have a distillery, as a distillery. So I got the formula approved by the TTB to make an ice bock through the distillery. So we made one. It's kind of a long roundabout story. Every year, at least the last couple of years, they've asked me to announce a category in the NHC winners. And so like the first time I was just like, yeah, we'll brew with the winner at Heretic. And it was like a double IPA or something, which is fine. And then next year I was like, I'll do the same thing. And it turned out to be an ice box. And I'm like, well, can't really legally brew an ice box. So I had to argue with the TTB for a while about, allowing me to brew the ice box. And I did. Well, the problem is we have to pay distillery taxes on it, which is a lot higher. It's worlds higher, especially in California, for spirits taxes. So it's gonna be insanely, cost prohibitive. We couldn't make this on the large scale, anyways. But we'll probably break even on it or something, which is fine. Who cares? I see those kinds of things as fun to do. It's fun for the customers, and it's challenging. And so we really want to keep doing those things if we can.
As you think about like all of the time that you spent going from homebrew to a business, starting up the business, getting it running, getting it to a consistent basis, if you can go back in time and tell yourself at the start of going from homebrew to pro, if you can give yourself some sort of advice or give you some sort of warning about what was coming,
right,
what would you tell yourself?
Oh, probably that I'd make more money just, keeping the stocks that I had and not investing in the brewery.
That's not making me feel good.
Yeah, it's, you make more money other ways. If you have a good paying job, just keep doing your good paying job and homebrew, and you'll have less headaches and more enjoyment. And the one advantage to having a commercial brewery is, it opens your whole life becomes brewing beer and the beer community. And so you get to meet a lot more people than I think you would otherwise. You get to interact in a lot more, and you start making a lot more friends that are other commercial brewers, elsewhere in the world. So it kind of broadens your community there, and that's nice. The people are the best part of it.
Yeah, I think as my wife and I brew together all the time, we're still new compared to everybody else on this call and everybody else in the group. We're the youngsters. So
how long have you been brewing?
Maybe 3 years. And,
okay.
and maybe we've been
brewing. A long time.
No, not at all. Yeah, and we've only been brewing fairly well beer in the last year and a half. So we're still learning and getting all this great information from this group and the local brewers. One of the things that and I personally still struggle with is coming up with original recipes, recipes that are ours. Can you walk us through that process on how you come up with your own recipes?
It starts with some sort of notion that you have, and it can be anything from a food that you like, or a smell, or a song, or just something that kind of inspires you, and you kind of get a little idea in your head. It's like, oh, this would be cool if that was a beer, or what if oh, here's a cool name. And you hear a song, you think, oh, that's a cool name, that would be a cool name for a beer. I'm going to make a beer, I'm going to call it this. And then just the name kind of gives you some ideas of where you want to go. And so I'm sure we've all kind of had that thing where it's like, oh, you get some concept. It's like, well, it's going to be a dark beer, it's going to be a lighter colored beer, it's going to be in between that, it's going to be hoppy, or it's going to be malty. You kind of set those initial parameters, or it'll be sour, or it'll be whatever it'll be. And then generally you kind of match up those basic parameters. If you don't have something specific, like we wanted to do a a blonde, a blonde stout, a big blonde stout, with a friend of mine at True Symmetry, Jason. And, we started talking about it, and I just wasn't that thrilled with the idea. And then we're just like, well, what about a big, cookie beer? And, so we kind of went that route. And then, you have certain parameters that you want. And usually you marry that up with, okay, what yeast profile is going to go well with it. So, you need a clean yeast, you need, a fruity yeast, you need, lager, you need sour, you need, what is it you need? And then from there, you start layering in what would be, the malts or the hops, depending on what you're doing. Maybe you pull back on the malt, and very, basic malt bill, and a ton of hops. Just depends on the beer you're doing. If it was something classic, anything out of the the BJCP style guide back in the day, then what I would do would be reading the style guide thoroughly, interpreting what was said there, and going out and finding the commercial examples, drinking them, and kind of associating the flavors I was tasting, the descriptions I was reading, and matching that up with the ingredients that I knew would provide those flavors. So as far as classic styles, that's usually the route I would go. And then I would enter it into, competitions and see what the feedback was, and then adjust from there and try and dial it in.
What's interesting is that a lot of the stuff that you realized that you've just talked us through is very artistic. And I come from a music background, and it just reminds me of like that same sort of thought process on how you create something new in art or in any sort of artistic realm. So I think that's what's so fun for us about brewing, and I'm sure with many others, is you're really taking influence on things like a name or a sound or a smell or a song, right, or all of these different things, which is so fun.
Yeah, I'm sure, paintings, songs, foods, they're all inspired by these, these other things. I'm sure there's songs have been written because somebody, smelled something, and so it's the thing I love about brewing is it's a creative process, allows you to express your creativity, but it's also almost an engineering process. And so utilizing techniques of that are common to engineering, allows you improve and adjust. You see the inputs, and you can experience the outputs based off of it. And so it's just a matter of iterative work to get to the result you want. It can be very consistent, yet very artistic. So I think that's why a lot of people really gravitate towards it. And being able to share the result with others is kind of a great thing.
And I think as we talk about some of those sort of kind of artistic influences into brewing, what right now in the brewing world excites you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm old and jaded now. Too many battle scars and calluses. I think it's interesting. A lot of the new hops, they're really just accelerated hop breeding tremendously. And then also some of the different hop products, they're separating out the compounds of the hops into the various components, and allowing you to play around with those, which is kind of fun because that's something that is completely new and very interesting, as far as, the industry goes. And then, the other thing is, those genetically modified yeasts, kind of two minds about that, but I think I'm not really sure commercial homebrewers should be using genetically modified yeast. If they are, I think they need to make it very clear to people that they are. Not that, I have no problem with it. I don't think it's going to do anything to harm me, but I know people are very concerned about that. And I think people need to have full trust in what is being provided to them. You need very clear labeling. And there's a lot of craft brewers out there that are, and large brewers that are using these genetically modified yeasts, and they're not revealing that to their consumer. And I think that that's a very bad road to go down. I think it's going to come back and bite people. And I've always said you absolutely have to disclose that. You got to make it very clear on the packaging or in your tap room. Because again, half the people don't care. Half the people, it's the end of the world to them. So you just need to make sure. But I think it's a very fascinating thing, and it's really amazing the flavors that come out of those yeasts, and what it's capable of. I don't know if any of you all have tried beers made with it, but I've had quite a few samples. One of our brewers, he left to work for this Berkeley Science folks that were kind of the leader in this space. And one day he brought back a bunch of different beers with that stuff they were doing. It was really fascinating. And so I think as a home brewer, that's a really cool thing to play around with. It's just bizarre what's possible. But they use yeast to produce vaccines and all sorts of compounds. Yeasts are capable, they can modify yeast to produce all sorts of things. So it's not surprising that they're able to do this. And so I think those are cool. What we really were getting into was producing spirits, and so the spirits part of it was kind of fun. I see that just as an extension of brewing, if you ask me.
Sure. All right, I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to the group. What breweries out there do you think are really pushing the edge of brewing, doing exciting, cool things?
I don't know. I don't get a chance to really go around and visit breweries or anything. It's not that often that I get to. And I don't, I just didn't have the time to follow, who's doing what, really.
Anything new that you've tried that just knocked your socks off? Like, wow, this is amazing.
No. I mean, there's lots of great beers out there. And beers I think are perfect, but nothing really just mind-blowing. I mean, you have so many beers, and then I couldn't answer that question. I don't know.
Well, you think,
I've been working 7 days a week for the past decade, and there's no time for anything. I have 1,000 hours of vacation time saved up. That's what running a brewery is like. When you got your own business, any small business is like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to manage it better, that's more power to you. But I wasn't. I was just full time all the time. It's the only way. Too much worry. We have 50 employees, and close to $1 million in hop contracts, and being the person financially responsible for that, making sure that 50 people get their paycheck is very stressful. It's something that I don't enjoy.
Do you find it's a struggle? I'm going back on my word here. One more question. Do you find it's a struggle to keep the fun in it, or do you find a way to balance that?
That's a good question. I think it's definitely a struggle, and you can burn yourself out, and you can become very, I think that's it can be very tough. But I think if you make time, it's kind of like marriage, right? If you make time to be happy and to do fun things and to find the fun in your marriage, then you will. If you stress out about everything and you don't set yourself those goals and those ideals, then it very quickly goes sour on you, I think. And the same thing for brewing. I think there were lots of stressful times, but there were also lots of laughter and great times because we got to choose the people we worked with, and we chose people that we enjoyed working with and that we thought were smart and hardworking, and that's always a joy. So and by my nature, I'm somebody that jokes around a lot, so I always employed people that appreciated humor, and so that was always fun. And I love those folks, so that's one of the benefits of having your own business versus being an employee somewhere. Being an employee somewhere, you don't get to choose all the employees, but when you're at the top, you get to choose everybody.
Right on. All right, let's open it up to the group. Does anybody have any questions for Jamil?
I just want to say, you just told us everything you're doing and how stressful it is and how busy you are. So busy that you can't even go around tasting beer. Yet here you are with us. And
oh yeah,
I'm so grateful. So thank you. Really.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I do this because I actually enjoy this. This for me is fun. And I love talking to people that are passionate about beer that aren't selling beer, or don't have anything really to defend. A lot of brewers become very defensive, about their place in the industry or things like that. And so it's just nice to talk to home brewers. I still have always considered myself a home brewer, whether it was, commercially or not. It's just a much larger batch size, and I have a license to sell it. That's the difference. It's the same. It's the exact same process, though.
Well, thank you, and thank you for leading the way, because obviously, you obviously are, and you have a bunch of fans here. So
that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Jamil, do you remember the first medal you won at NHC?
I think it was in Texas, I think it was in Houston, and I think it was for a Scottish ale, maybe. And I think that was it. I was there. Harold Gabranson was there. I think Bob McKay was there.
Do you remember what year it was?
2000 and I don't know. Just somebody quickly Google
Jamil.
NHC venues in what year.
So I have kind of an NHC related question. It's kind of the
Could've been
lore of we've hosted in Seattle here a bunch of times. And a friend of ours, Jim, told me a story, and maybe you can verify this, that this crazy guy, Jamil, drove like 28 beers up from San Francisco just to drop them off, guaranteeing they'd be fresh for the tasting. Did you do that?
Up
One year?
Up to where?
Up to Seattle?
Up to Seattle? Boy, I don't remember if I did or not. I would. It's certainly possible. Certainly possible. One of the things I used to do was, especially for NHC, I would buy an ice chest, and then I would put my entries into the ice chest, and then I would seal that up and ship the ice chest with ice packs and everything, so it remained cold the whole way. And then I used to drive entries like down to San Diego or up from San Diego, you know, to here. And yeah, I made my wife drive entries, like, you know, 4 hours one way, you know, that type of thing. And she'd do it for me. She's a great sport. Couldn't have had any success in life without her. Yeah, it's possible, but I probably would have had something else that I was, you know, going to do or something. I don't know. It's certainly possible.
So I kind of saw, I know it's like clearly for the last couple of years been hard for breweries and stuff like that. But then also on the positive side, it's kind of creating some acceleration and doing new things. I saw you guys were canning cocktails at one point in time, which I really would like to ship some to Washington, but apparently that's going to happen, as well as your beer. Hopefully that'll happen someday. But
got to get a distributor up there.
Yeah.
If we had a distributor, we could.
Okay. So what, like, is there anything that happened over the last couple of years that you're just like, I never would have thought of that, but man, it really worked out well. Like, this is something that's kind of changed our business plan or changed your model a little bit?
Yeah, the cocktails are huge. You know, beer is kind of suffering a pullback, and if you're in the business, ready to drink cocktails, that's huge. That's where all the growth is happening, and that's where I think you know, could be, you know, more revenue for us in the next 2 years than the beer is. I mean, it's really, there's higher margins to it. It takes about 3 days to produce canned cocktails, where it takes about 3.5 weeks to produce canned beer. So just the tank time, the labor is far less. The taxes are much higher, but the energy involved is much less. The yield is much higher because you don't have hops and yeast taking up space in there. So yeah, canned cocktails are huge. And years ago, I never thought we would be doing that. That was kind of a game changer. And then also, you know, hazy beers. I didn't think hazy beers. I thought hazy beers would do well, but I didn't think they would completely take over the market as extremely as they have. You know, I don't know of a brewery that's not making a hazy IPA, and most are making several of them, and some breweries they make hundreds of them. You know, so that's another one that kind of caught me by surprise.
Is there a trend that you thought would have stuck that didn't? You talk about hazies and those sticking around. Things like there's milkshake IPAs and, you know.
Yeah, I think I thought the Brute IPA may actually do something, but I think the problem was, and I was talking with somebody else about this not too long ago. The New England IPA, a lot of the initial beers that people were producing were pretty bad. Maybe not on the East Coast, but on the West Coast where we're at. A lot of what you could get that people were brewing were terrible. And I was just like, man, this is nasty. I don't think this is gonna last. But you know, they were being well done enough elsewhere, and kind of the name of it, the New England IPA, juicy IPAs, it all, you know, it sounded pretty good. And so I think it hung around long enough for people to get their act together and understand how to brew good ones. And that is what helped. On the Brut IPA, there were some good ones being brewed, but there were a huge number of really bad ones. And most of what was being brewed were bad. Same thing as New England IPA. However, the name of it isn't that attractive, and the kind of the story of it is pretty weak. You know, it just didn't really resonate with consumers, and I think that's I think it's pretty much just killed off. I don't know. There's very few of them being produced now. I don't think it didn't have the legs to last until everybody could figure out how to really do it well. The ones that were done well were really good, but you know, it just, I think that's, you know, that killed it off. Kind of fascinating, you know, what makes something survive and something not. The session beer thing, you know, everyone was going on, oh, session IPA, that's the next big thing. You know, everyone's going to want session IPA. Oh, everybody's going to be, that's the big thing. Oh, you know, you should make lower ABV beers. And I'm like, no, nobody wants lower ABV beers, because I had done the lower ABV beer thing and I knew that people didn't want them. I mean, some people do. I go and enjoy a low ABV beer. That's something I enjoy, but the vast majority of people do not. And, you know, the distributors are like, oh, why aren't you making these session IPAs? I'm like, because it costs you as much to make as an 8% IPA. You know, malt is very cheap compared to all the other ingredients that go into your beer. But the hops are just stupid expensive. Like, so you're going to have a 4% beer that's just about as expensive to make as an 8% beer. Yet the consumer is going to want a discount on that. They're like, well, it's half the ABV. It should be half the price. I've literally heard people say that. So, you know, you can't tell them. It's like, well, it pretty much costs me the same to make both of these. They don't care. Unless they're getting that serious discount, they're going to go for the 8% beer all the time. And that's one thing I realized. I'm like, session IPA, never going to take off. And it still hasn't. And I think people are finally, you know, getting to grips with the fact that that's just a bad idea. The consumers want alcohol. They want to drink. You know, if they didn't want alcohol, they'd be drinking water or something else. You know, it wouldn't be so important. But it's of major importance to consumers, the amount of alcohol that they get for their dollar.
That's a great point. You go to any of the brew fests around here before COVID, and some of the longest lines are for those beers that are 8, 9, 10, 12%.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's getting that most bang for your buck.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. I see another question.
Yeah, one of the cool things our club does is same recipe beers. And so we'll get a recipe, and Jim in our club will put all the ingredients together and we'll all brew it. And then we'll all come back together and we'll taste them. And we can see how this same ingredient kit makes amazingly different beers, because everybody's got a different system and a different method.
Exactly.
And a lot of them have come from your book.
Uh-huh.
And in the next couple of months, we're going to do a Vienna lager out of your book.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for the crew to really focus in on?
I think the thing to do is, after you all brew it, you bottle them up. Okay, and you submit them in bottles. All right, so you all need to bottle one extra one, and then you send them down to me, and then let me try them.
Yes.
And let's see who the winner is.
Will you come to our meeting and try them like with us while we're live?
If I happen to be driving up that way, dropping off entries, yes.
I mean Zoom. Zoom. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
it'll probably be Zoom. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That'd be cool. Yeah, that's the thing. And I also, I tried to drill this into the folks that we've employed, is that, just slight differences in the way you do something changes the outcome of the beer.
Mhm.
So and the example I've always used is, let's say at 3 minutes, you need to shut off this valve, for whatever purpose in your brewing process. Well, there are people who they stand next to the valve looking at their watch, and when the second hand hits, they shut the valve, quickly. So it's exactly 3 minutes. There are people who they set an alarm for 3 minutes, and when it's beeping, they go, oh, okay. And then they wander over there and eventually shut the valve off. And it may be 3 minutes and 5 seconds, maybe 3.5 minutes. And then there's people that just guess at it, and it could be 2.5 minutes, who knows. While that one individual action does not seem like it means much, it's the mentality of that person, it's their technique of brewing that isn't just in that one thing, it's in all the little things that they do. And when you add all those together, they start to taste different. The beer tastes different. You're producing a different beer, because beers can be extremely repeatable. There's a lot of agricultural products, and it'll change from year to year. But when you're dealing with all of you have all the same ingredients from the same lot, and you make the beer, it's your brewing technique that's changing things. And it can be the equipment as well. There's ways to overcome equipment, differences in equipment to make it taste the same. For example, we got ourselves a little 5-barrel brew plant about a year ago to do some taproom beers and collabs and do some playing around on, because our main brew plant's about 37 barrels. Well, my guys were just like, oh, the beer didn't attenuate as much as I thought it would. I said, well, how long are you taking to to run off the wort from dough in to kettle full? How long is that taking? And they're like, 45 minutes or something like that, whatever it was. And I'm like, and how long is it on the 37 barrel? And they're like, well, it's like 2 hours. I'm like, there's your difference. You need to, when we did Can You Brew It? It's really fascinating. The Can You Brew It episodes, if you haven't listened to those, you should listen to them. It'll teach you a lot about brewing and brewing on a commercial level or scaling up your beers. Because one of the things, you ask a question, I'm just going to ramble on, Lori, onto all sorts of other subjects.
Keep it going.
In Can You Brew It, I would, interview brewers about their beer. And you'll hear in those interviews, I'm asking, it's like, how long does it take you to whirlpool? How long does it take you to transfer from the kettle to the whirlpool? How long does it take you to knock out? All these questions. And what I was trying to get at is how much time is it taking from the end of your boil to it's, cold in the fermenter? Because the wort is changing during that time. And if you don't match up those times with what you're doing on a smaller scale, you're never going to get it. So you have to follow those same times, even if you don't need to do it, even if your process can be faster, you need to do that in order to get exactly the same beer out of it. So that's one of the things. It's always going to be different. It's very difficult for two different brewers to brew exactly the same thing on using the same equipment, same ingredients, same recipe, same everything. It's going to be different because we'll have brewers come in for shifts, and the first guy, his batch will be this, and then the next guy's numbers will be slightly different, or even the same person when they're doing multiple turns. Their first turn isn't going to be the same as their next turn. And try as I might, I can't really get across to everybody how critical it is that they do things exactly the same way, same timing, same method. You can't just, you can, as a home brewer, you can do anything you want and the beer is going to turn out quite good. If you want it to be exactly the same every time, you have to take, detailed control over what you're doing, and you have to be, methodical in your approach and precise in what you're doing. You have to pay attention to what seems like small details. That's how, you can make something consistent, repeatable. As far as doing the best job of what's in Brewing Classic Styles, make sure you're using fresh ingredients, make sure you're, temperature controlling your ferment, that you're pitching an adequate amount of healthy yeast. Those things will mean all the difference in the world. One common problem I find when people are starting to homebrew is, or people that are into home brewing, they will get excited about brewing a beer, and they will go down to the homebrew shop and they'll buy like enough stuff to brew like 6 batches. Great, they're all into it, but then they will brew 1 or 2, and then it's 6 months, 9 months, a year later, and then they'll brew another one, and you can taste the stale ingredients. Somebody brought me their first beer that they brewed, and I could taste it was stale, and I'm like, this is the first batch you ever brewed. I'm like, you need to use fresh ingredients. And he was like, yeah, I got those ingredients like a year ago. Oh, because I just never got around to it. Like, they're food products. And if you used like, year-old eggs, in making scrambled eggs, do you think it would taste the same as using, eggs that the chickens just laid? It's different. And so, same thing happens to these ingredients. So fresh ingredients are critical as well.
I have to say, a lot of the things that you were just talking about with measurements, and I have my background is, the past 15 years in the tech industry. It's all around data and measurements, and I thought that we were taking a lot of measurements, and that was one of the first really good feedback that we got from a local brewer, pro brewer. Measure everything along the way.
Even if you don't know why you're measuring it, you don't know why you need it. Measure it anyway.
Yeah.
That and write everything down. As you'll want to figure out what you did, later on, and if you haven't written it down, you won't know how to repeat what you did. It's interesting. Some measurements are more important than others. For example, one of the ones that people often ignore or don't know is kettle measurements. The volume in the kettle, and just a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch off in the kettle can make for a tremendous difference in the gravity of the work. And you need to get that, your rate of boil and your liquid volumes, they need to be fairly precise. If they're not, you end up with problems there. So that's like a very important one. Measuring temperature. You need to measure you need to know the temperature of the beer as it's fermenting. Not the temperature of the room, not, you guess at it. I'll ask people, what was your starting gravity? And they're like, well, I don't know. Like, well, what was your finishing gravity? I don't know. It's like, well, then, here's a couple of fundamental things you want to measure. But yeah, just, keeping track of time and things like that, quite important.
Well, one new measurement that I'm adding now after hearing this is the time from the end of my boil to the point where I'm cooled down and pitching yeast. I've never measured that before.
Right.
That'll be super.
Yeah, and if you want to repeat a process and know that, well, it wasn't, some people will blame it on the hops or something else, but if you let it sit there hot an extra 15 minutes, you will extract or isomerize more, of the acids in the hops and produce, more bittering. It's, you can't just go like, oh yeah, well, I gotta run to the store, I'm gonna take a break and get something to eat. It makes a difference. It's okay if that happens. It's not going to make bad beer, but it's when you get to that point where you're trying to win, medals, or you're trying to make the best beer possible, or you go commercial, then you really have to be able to do that.
Sure. Hey, Randy, I saw that you had your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. All right, Jamil, you're walking down the street. In the behind you, you hear "Great Scott!" You turn around, you see some guy that looks like Christopher Lloyd sitting in Delorean. You say, "Hey, you're Christopher Lloyd," and he says, "No, actually, I'm Elliot Brown, but you can call me Doc. Listen, I've drank your beer. It's great. I'm enjoying it. I want to give you a once in a lifetime experience. So hop in the DeLorean. We're gonna go back to any time in history, and you can observe or influence the brewing culture. Where do you want to go?"
You're like, yeah, that's not for me. I'll pass. But I think the obvious thing is that thing about going back in time and killing Hitler as a baby. Maybe you stop. Either you stop Prohibition or you stop, the influence of the high adjunct light lager, brewing. Maybe that's where you go back to, because I think prior to that, or maybe you go and you stop, the industrialization of brewing, which was really back in the era with porters in England. Maybe you stop that and just try and keep everything on a smaller scale. I don't know. What's your answer to that, Randy?
Oh, good. Back.
Throw it back at him.
I think I'd finally go to France and see how beer's made over there.
No. You have to go back and stop something from happening.
No. You could observe
brewing.
it too. Okay, fine. Let's see. I really liked your answer on killing Prohibition.
Right. Because I think that had a major impact on beer, afterwards, and I don't know.
But was there anything happening underground? Because there was a lot of alcohol being made underground. Was there anything happening there that actually influenced us positively today?
That's that. Now see, now you're thinking. Now I like that. I like that point. That's a good point, because I think a lot of the home brewing culture came from Prohibition and people making their own beers. There's still a lot of stories that from people that started brewing in Prohibition. One of the coolest things I ever saw was at New Ulm, August Shell. Anybody been to August Shell Brewery? Ever heard of it? It's the second oldest brewery in the United States.
Oh, Lori and Will, yeah.
And you go there, and they've got this little museum set up on the property. Beautiful property with like peacocks and deer running around, and that they brought over, and this brick brewery. And in their little museum there, they've got like the still. It's got a bunch of gouges and cuts in it. And you're thinking, what's this piece of junk here? And during Prohibition, like Grandpa was couldn't, they were making a non-alcoholic beer, a malt beverage, right, for sale. And Grandpa couldn't stand it, so he was distilling on the side in private, and then he would just pour a little bit into his non-alcoholic beer, and he would drink that. And that's how Grandpa was making his way through Prohibition. And every once in a while he'd worry that the government was coming, and so he would get out an axe and he'd chop up the still to get rid of the still. And so they had one of those, and it's just hilarious. I was just like, that is so cool. What a piece of history. So yeah,
adversity breeds creativity. That's what came to mind.
There you go. Yeah, I don't know. I think the beer world it's so dynamic and changes so easily. If you look at the beers we're brewing today versus the beers we're brewing 20 years ago versus 20 years before that, and then maybe there was a gap there where it took a long time, where there was less creativity and more standardization across the world, and these lagers that were being brewed. But you go before that, and so I think, yeah, we got to where we got today. I don't tend to worry about the past and what happened in the past. I'm always kind of like, well, am I happy today? Then I made the right choices and did the right things, and life worked out exactly how it should. So I guess it's kind of the same thing in the beer world. You enjoy the beers you're drinking today, then yeah, everything, maybe you shouldn't change anything then. You ever watch like The Butterfly Effect or any of those other movies? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, yep, exactly. That's what would happen. I know if I went back to change something, I would screw everything up.
You would
I'd
do it
have the
all
best
up for us, wouldn't you?
Right. We'd have like no beer. There'd
Don't
be like
kiss your
no
mom.
beer. It'd be, we'd all be drinking,
We'd all be drinking seltzer.
seltzer, right?
That's
Or
what we would be drinking.
everything would be seltzer, or there'd be no alcohol whatsoever. It would be totally screwed up.
I love it.
I got a question about brewing big stouts. I've been brewing stouts for a long time, and getting that big Russian Imperial stout with that real thick, heavy mouthfeel has eluded me. You got any tips on doing that?
A lot of it is layering in your ingredients, but a big part of it is fermentation, the right fermentation. And you want to, it depends on what we'd have to drink some beers together to really delve into this more. But you can have a big, full beer that has attenuated well, and you can have a smaller beer that doesn't taste that way and it's just sweet. So sweet isn't necessarily big, but that's one of the things that happens. I'd always just focus on building the good base of proteins, the dextrins, and just fermenting well, choosing the right yeasts for what you're trying to achieve.
I've always had this idea that I'd like to make something. I've already named it. It's called Big Hop Scotch. And the idea was, I want to smell it and think I'm going to drink this heavy IPA, but then have it be just all malt. And the whole thing eludes me. Any idea how that might be generated?
The problem you'll run into is, the more malt that you have present, the less your hops will come out aromatically and in flavor. It'll be, the malt just buries the hop character. So it's two things, fighting. It's trying to, if you want some, a piece of paper that is black, but you want it to have a lot of white in it, you end up with gray.
Yeah, I did. The idea was I want all the aroma and none of the bittering.
Yeah, it's not just bittering. So, the malt thing will suppress the hop aroma and flavor as well. It's interesting. We were working on making a Greyhound, and the grapefruit character was not popping in this thing. And I said, well, let's reduce the sugar by 1/100th of what we have in there currently. 1% of the actual mass sugar. It's just this tiny adjustment. I'm like, because we didn't want it to become too bitter, because the grapefruit can be very bitter. So I'm just like, let's just take it down 1% at a time till we get there. We took 1% off and the grapefruit popped. And it was just that little bit of sweetness was just burying the grapefruit character. So we're still balancing out the bittering, but it just, there's a certain point where it just overwhelms it. You could try doing something like just pouring in some hop aromatic oils that they sell. That might be your best bet. But it'll take a bunch of it, and it may not taste very good once you do that.
That's an interesting point, because you had commented about how the malts overpower, certainly on darker beers, hops. We had submitted a CDA to the homebrew competition, and we got some really great feedback from that about the absence of the hops up front. And what we found was, after doing that recipe over and over again, we had to put 4 times the amount of dry hops in that we would have in any other type of IPA, and we finally got it to pop. Mm-hmm. And it was just that huge of a difference of overpowering the malt and the kind of the roastiness coming from the malts to be able to get that hop up front. So it's such an interesting learning experience that you've just helped validate for us as we continue to grow. Yeah, and it's not just necessarily base malt and adding a lot more base malt. It's also it's mainly the character full malts, crystal malts, roasted malts, all those kill off the hop character. And the other thing that we found is that hop character drops off really quickly after a few weeks as well. I mean, you lose that very quickly, because those flavors come right back up from the malts. Yep. Yeah, trying to bottle and then send something into a competition. And this was our first ever. We've only ever done one. Yeah, it was like, oh my God, we're going to lose. We're literally thinking, oh my God, how long does it take to get there? And then it's going to sit this long. And then it takes them this long to judge it. Like, it's all going to be gone by then. That's why you gotta get in your car and drive it out there. Yeah, we had somebody driving it out there, but it's still, it's 13 hours. Yeah. Right on. All right. Anyone else from the group have any questions? Because I have one last one. I know we've kept you. Go for it. I got really a quick question, but just this Christmas I was given a whiskey barrel, so I was gonna
do a Flanders red in it, and all the internet pointed to your 2007 podcast about it. So I just wondered if you had anything different to add since 2007 about brewing a Flanders red in a barrel.
I'm sure I do, but I can't recall what I said in 2007. I mean, if I listened to it, I'd probably go, well, you know, I'm sure I'd have some notes for myself. Did you have anything specific about it that you were wondering?
I mean, I've never brewed one, so I can't.
Yeah. How big a barrel is it?
10 gallon.
10 gallon. Yeah, you're going to get a fair amount of oxygen in that. And so I would, you know, only leave it in the barrel for a portion of the time. And the rest of the time you might transfer it back to stainless or glass or something like that to prevent too much oxygen. If you get too much oxygen, it really, you know, can go south on you pretty quick. It becomes too aggressive. Yeah. Because if you look at what they do in you know, these you know, places like Rodenbach, you know, they have the very large foeders, and so the surface to liquid ratio is completely different than a little barrel. The smaller it gets, the more oxygen per, you know, per ounce of liquid is occurring, and so it can be too much. You got to be careful. One of the beers that we do is called Taffle Bully, and it's the interesting thing about it is it has a bunch of Brett in it, but we brew the beer with a Belgian ale strain, the White Labs 530. And then we dose it with the Brett, and then we transfer it immediately into stainless, into kegs. And we store it for a year, 2 years in the kegs like that. Then we taste all the kegs, we transfer out the ones that we think taste the best back into a fermenter, and then we carbonate it up and we package it. And what happens is you get a completely different flavor from the Brett in doing this than you do if you have it in an environment where oxygen can get to it. So the amount of oxygen that these organisms are able to utilize changes what they're going to produce. So that's one of the things that you want to be aware of, the amount of oxygen. So
an interesting thing about the podcast was that you mentioned that they were going to get rid of the Rosalaire, and it's still around. So
right. No, they had canceled it. They had canceled it, and they weren't going to make it anymore. And I talked to him and I said, look, you can't do that. I love this. And they're like, well, you know, if more people bought it, I said, well, don't cancel it. I said, I'll tell everybody about it. And, you know, they're like, well, okay. I knew they didn't believe me, but I'm like, you know, so put the word out. And they're like, yeah, it's one of our best selling strains. To this day, they sell a ton of it.
Well, thank you.
They did an amazing amount of work on that, you know, where they did everything, you know, even down to sherry floor and all that they really worked very hard on it, and it is a really amazing blend.
All right. Any other questions from the group? All right, I got one final one before we let you go. If you were to suggest one recipe that we should do out of this book, what would it be?
For what reason?
But we haven't
drink, just turn to page, you know, one, and it doesn't matter. Random.
We have an open all group brew.
Right.
And I think it would be great if we can get a suggestion from you on what we should brew.
Tell them what we got on the calendar so far.
Yeah, I don't know. So a couple of the recipes in there really stand out in my memory. You know, one is the Southern English Brown, because that never failed to win awards. Every time it went in, it usually won first place, maybe sometimes second place, but it always won awards. That people just love that beer. I don't know. That one, and the Schwartz beer as well. It's not really as authentic a Schwartz beer should be, but people love it. It wins awards. We actually brewed it on the 5-barrel at Heretic, and people just love that beer. So we're actually brewing it again. So that's another good one. If you wanted a lager, I'd do that.
I won a local, the Cascade Cup, with that recipe. Best in show. Got like a Blinkman conical fermenter due to that recipe right there.
Nice.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, that one's still a winner. And then the Scottish ales, those have always been, done extremely well. That actually, I think it was in the NHC. It's in the NHC. I swept the category with the Scottish ales, which is tough to do in a competition like that. I would go with, maybe one of those. Those are all good. I mean, lots of great recipes in there. It just depends, whatever you're feeling like doing.
Right on.
So one question from the back. Do you remember the Oakland NHC when the hookers came into the club night?
Yes. I remember that was, I remember somebody gave me the Eyinger goats, these little things, gave me a number of them, and I was handing them out to people, I remember, and then the ladies came in, and that was, but God bless us, I don't think anybody was really, people just like invited them to the party. It was like, yeah, come on in, have a drink. Nobody
except for the cops that followed them in.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe somebody, I think somebody probably turned them in, but I think just in general, most homebrewers are just like, sure, who cares, everybody deserves to have a good beer every now and then. Doesn't matter what you do for a living.
Ain't that the truth?
Oakland was fun.
It was. Well, I've enjoyed all your shows over the years. The Candy Brews with Tasty, those were some of the best. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Those are good. I've enjoyed doing it. It's fascinating. I've learned a lot by doing the shows over the years.
Thank you so much. Like, I have to say, I feel like this was my favorite guest we've had, like, truly.
Thank you.
We love your book, but to hear your perspective and your stories, I don't know about you, but I'm inspired to dive in even more. Great.
Yeah, I like to hear people brewing, and when you do that Vienna lager, let me know.
Yeah, we'll try to coordinate a way to ship you some bottles. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jamil, for joining our group and talking with us tonight. It's been a great experience, and we really appreciate all of the wisdom that you've helped pass on to us.
Well, and again, I apologize for missing the previous meeting. I feel
We're here now.
So bad about that. I can't believe it. I'm not one to flake on commitments, so it made me feel really bad.
Well, the fact that you're as busy as you are, like, I'll give you a slide for that one.
I was doing nothing that night. I was sitting
No.
around watching TV.
No, that's not what you're supposed to say. You were very busy doing brewing
That's
things.
right. I was very busy doing important brewing things.
Yeah. No,
I appreciate your honesty.
I just screwed it up.
Just let us know what you were watching because it feels like it was pretty important.
I know, right?
No,
What
no, I think it
Netflix
was.
do you recommend?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you
Thanks.
all.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Enjoyed chatting with you, and
Thank you.
hopefully I'll see you
Thanks so
again.
much.
All right. Take
Yeah,
care.
fantastic.
Goodbye.
Thanks
Talk
a
to you
lot.
soon. Take care.
Cheers, thanks.
Cheers.